Tonight, we won't ride across frozen fields or speak of raids under the northern lights. Instead, we'll step into a hall where breath and fire share the same rhythm. The roof creaks once, settling into its own heartbeat. Smoke drifts in a thin ribbon toward the rafters, drawing slow circles around the sleeping. Here, words are weighed like coins before they're spent, and silence keeps the law better than any blade. You can almost hear it, the hush that folds itself between every ember and sigh. So dim the lamp, let the warmth gather in your hands, and if your breathing begins to slow with the faint pulse of the coals, that's the house remembering it is alive. Somewhere in the rafters, a small crack answers back, a beam settling into sleep. The hush thickens like wool. Even the wind outside forgets its errands. You can feel the house deciding what to keep awake. The slow turn of smoke, the sigh beneath the floorboards, the memory of boots drying by the fire. In this kind of quiet, time doesn't move forward. It folds itself beside you and listens. And just before the last ember blinks, the rules of night begin. Evening begins by getting smaller. Lamps are pinched to coals. The smoke hole narrows because a hole is simply another way for noise to escape. Boots turn solace in so leather can dry without sighing. Children slide into the wall beds like letters into a slot. An older brother shows a younger one how to fold his sleeping cloak so it will not argue with him in the dark. A woman sets a pot of water near the banked hearth. It is not needed, but people sleep better knowing a plan exists. Words shrink. Names are saved for morning. That is the rule few remember and everyone learns. Names travel far, so nighttime uses none. A nickname might be allowed if it is shaped like a yawn. There is a steward of hush. Not an official title, only the person with the patience to herd sound the way others herd sheep. He sits near the fire with a stick of ash and the calm expression of someone who has seen every kind of clatter. 2 fingers mean enough. A flat palm means sleep. He can stop a giggle by pointing at the smoke hole, because everyone understands that smoke listens, and listening smoke invites listening men, and listening men have knives. When strangers first share the house, they try to memorize the hand signs before they learn the beds. It is like learning a very short alphabet. Some evenings, the steward does nothing. His mere patience trims the air. Other evenings, he taps the stick once against the floor. The sound is small but full. Even the dog hears the punctuation. Quiet begins when dusk fits itself to ember glow, and the voices agree to stay small. The benches along the walls grow into bunks. The rafters settle. Wool rustles like grass in snow. If someone must cross the room, they do it the long way, not the fast way, because straight lines are for daytime speed and crooked paths are for night. A nod becomes a sentence. A yawn becomes a polite excuse. I am told that in some houses a pair of cousins competed to see who could lift a kettle more silently. The steward ended the contest by moving the kettle to the shelf and tapping his stick in 2 slow beats, meaning in essence that kettles announce their own victories and need no human help. Quiet matters because cows believe in it. They listen from the byre that shares the back wall, and their breathing is the metronome by which the house falls asleep. Noise invites wolves and men with worse intentions. Quiet keeps the farm small, as if you could fold the whole settlement into the size of your palm and put it under your head. Milk settles better when voices are calm before dawn. The wind reads the thatch. If there are too many words, the wind loses interest and stops warning. This is one of those rural ideas that sounds like poetry and functions like plumbing. You ignore it only once. The law also cares. There are rules about night, not written on parchment, but braided into habits. Dreams dislike crowds, and the hush makes room for messages, which is a polite way of saying that sleeping is a civic duty. Quarrels after sunset are taxed by dawn. You pay twice. First with a bad night, then with the long work of forgiving breakfast. Oaths sworn at night count double, because the house is a witness and houses do not forget. If someone must bargain in the dark, they touch the lintel and speak one word only, The rest is implied. Luck sleeps lightly and dislikes being bumped. People joke that if you shake the bed of luck, it wakes up on the wrong side and borrows your socks. The elder who keeps the hush has a basket of old solutions. If the roof creaks, he tells the smallest to lie still and count the knot holes. If a baby fusses, he leans forward with his ash stick and draws a slow line on the dirt floor as if measuring the night. It is quite useless as a spell, which makes it perfect for calming everyone, because nothing lowers the human voice like a ceremony that does not quite believe itself. When someone sneezes, no one blesses him. Blessings are too loud. Instead, there is a shared intake of breath, a tiny unity, and then the slow returning of air to its proper level, like a tide deciding to behave. Speaking without speaking is a skill, and a longhouse treats it like carpentry. 3 taps on the bench mean water. 2 mean bar the plank door. A single light touch on your shoulder means slide over, which is the same signal a day-old lamb gives to its sibling, so it makes good pastoral sense. The hand laid over the braid asks for a blanket, not a story. A story always wants to grow legs and walk around the room, and legs are noisy. Mouth-to-ear murmurs ride the breath like small boats on still water. If a word must be said aloud, it is given a place to sit. That means you face the speaking shelf near the hearth, deliver the word to the shelf, and everyone watches the shelf except the responsibility. The word is not to be moved afterward. If it rolls from the shelf to the floor, someone will have to pick it up in the morning and explain the bruise. There is a code for work in the dark. Spindles move like thoughts, not like hammers. Whalebone comb teeth slide through hair at the speed of tide, which is slower than impatience and faster than guilt. The watch changes on the half-log, not the hour. A notch burned in last winter's oak shows the right time, and time is whatever hot coals agree to. Shoes wait by the door with toes pointing out, ready without shout. If you must step outside, you lift the latch with your smallest finger and let the cold do the alerting. A horn is reserved for fire or blood only. All other alarms are feet. On especially windy nights, the steward of hush goes to bed first, because people behave better once the traffic officer removes his hat. The hat, incidentally, is a piece of sensible wool that never makes a statement. There is a soft exchange rate between sound and work. If someone spins an extra skein, they are allowed one more whispered remark about a neighbor's sheep. If a boy mends 2 harness straps, he may hiss a joke through his teeth to the dog, who will pretend not to hear. Women keep time for the house by the even rhythm of their hands. Bread dough is punched in the next room with the courteous thump of a handshake. The stovestone gives small notes as it cools. The longhouse enjoys the concert quietly, like pilgrims at a shrine of warmth. I once heard that a young man trying to impress a girl demonstrated how he could pick up a wooden bucket without letting the iron hoop squeal. They later married, which tells you something about the local standards of romance. All this quiet produces, paradoxically, a new vocabulary. The rafters know the difference between a log settling and a shelf complaining. Snow on the roof speaks in flannel. Rain is a litter of soft coins. The dog-esque claws on the packed earth floor are an abacus counting sheep that do not belong to him. When distant guests arrive late and are shown a bed, they learn that words may be printed on hands. 5 fingers for wait 2 for enough, a curled thumb for put that back, the delicate flick for stop telling the story about the goose unless you have obtained the goose's permission. It is a surprisingly bureaucratic system, but the paperwork is very quiet. Of course, the quiet is broken because the Longhouse is not a monastery. It is a building full of opinions that are disguised as people. The first offense earns a smile, which feels like a fine if you were hoping for applause. The steward touches the floor with his ash stick, meaning this is where the sound belongs, in the ground, not in the rafters. The second offense earns the cold water bucket at dawn, which is not a punishment so much as a lifestyle recommendation. The third offense is unusual. A loud sleeper or a sudden ballad may be invited to spend a night by the door, where the draft keeps counsel and the moon looks in to help. Some households assign the noisy to hold the latch cord. By morning, they are experts in surface tension. Jokes survive the curfew, but they change their clothes. A goodnight joke is one that can be told with eyebrows. You can fit a surprising number of goats into eyebrows if you practice. Reparations for noise are paid in chores. A clatter during the evening earns a discreet sweep of the hearth in the morning. A shouted remark buys a careful hour of sharpening tools so the next day can be quieter. A dropped bowl becomes an inventory of the shelf where it lived, because storage asks for attention, and attention is the currency of silence. Children are taught that a patch blanket keeps words from leaking out. This is unscientific and extremely effective. The house is repaired the way thatch is repaired, quickly, kindly, firmly. 2 people climb a ladder, and one carries a bundle of reeds, and they speak to each other with their knees. Just so, when noise tears a small hole in the night, someone tosses a handful of calm up to catch on the rafters. If a laugh breaks loose after the lamps are pinched, it is gently docked beside the door and offered a cup of water. A brawl is rare, but a near brawl is common. It is solved by the steward handing the ash stick to the youngest observer, which shames the ambitious and amuses the sensible. There's nothing quite like being silently supervised by a 7-year-old with a ceremonial stick. Sometimes the quiet breaks because the world insists. A fox cries, the cattle knock the stall bar, snow slides. Wind declares a new treaty with the smoke hole. In those moments, everyone sits up without complaint, because the house is an instrument, and instruments need tuning. Someone opens the door and looks at the sky as if reading a slow letter. The horn is not taken down. Feet move instead. You could argue that this is a military drill, but it feels more like polite housekeeping in the larger room called outside. When the situation resolves, the door returns to its latch with the kind of closing that makes you think of the last page in a very short saga. Then there are the jokes that pretend to be laws. The cold water bucket becomes quite decorative in summer, so its legal authority is adjusted. Grandparents claim to hear a moth chewing on linen. Everyone believes them. A visiting trader once tried to pay his lodging in stories, and was told the rate after sunset is 1 story divided into weekly payments across winter. He left behind a spoon that was audibly heavy. The steward removed it to the barn, which solved everyone's curiosity at once. There is a belief that the house dreams through the cows, and that a sudden stamp in the byre means the Longhouse is correcting a date remembered by the wrong person. This is presumably nonsense and therefore very comforting. The Longhouse remembers its night rules in the morning, but carries them lightly. Breakfast is not quiet, it is tidy. People speak with the calm of those who have saved words and can afford them. The steward of Hush is just another farmer again, his ash stick leaning like a weary reed by the door. Children thump a little to prove they are alive. A man who dropped a bowl last night sweeps without being told. Milk is poured with the confidence that last night's silence stretched the cow's patience. If gossip appears, it is handled like hot bread, passed carefully, not waved in faces. The watchman who walked the half-log brings in the smell of dawn as if it were laundry, and the house nods to the day. You could argue that a longhouse that whispers keeps its stories longer. The dreams that arrive in such a house are seldom interrupted mid-sentence. They bring back solutions to small problems, like a knot that unties only if you think about barley first, or a hen that prefers to lay if you hum the 2-finger sign for enough. It is difficult to prove any of this, but the butter churn tends to agree. Morning thanks the night not for using up the words, but for keeping them sharp. There is a local proverb that claims a bright axe is simply a quiet argument that learned to sit still. The feeling at the end of a long winter night is the feeling of a ledger properly kept. The coals are banked, the house is whole, The silence is returned to its shelf like a folded cloak. Someone checks the smoke hole with a pole and pretends to speak to the sky about rent. The cows comment in their heavy way. A child practices the hand signs on his own and invents a new one for later, which is merely a slow circle in the air. The steward of hush pretends not to notice and uses it immediately. This is how laws grow in houses, softly like lichen, until the wall is a beautiful, quiet map. If you wear socks to bed, you will fit in. If you want a drink after dark, tap 3 times. 4 is ambitious. If your story is too exciting to shrink, you can lend it to the morning, which always pays its debts in coffee and chores. The door plank will tell you if the wind has changed opinion. The ash stick can draw a line on the floor. That means everyone forgives everyone as far as this line and no farther, which in practice is far enough. And if you remain awake while the hearth takes its slow breath, you will hear what every Longhouse hears. The tiny sound of a whole household agreeing without ceremony to be small for a few hours so the world outside will also be small. You can fall asleep now. The sticks are stacked straight. The shoes are pointing toward tomorrow. The bench has memorized the 3 taps and promises to remember them on your behalf. The steward of hush has hung his wool hat on a peg that does not squeak. The cows have reached the part of their dreams where fields are wide and flies are polite. The roof holds the night like a cup you can drink later. If you find yourself smiling in your sleep, it will not be counted as an offense. The Longhouse is keeping watch, not with a horn, but with patient feet. You might not expect a city to fall asleep 1 wick at a time, but that is how the 19th century learned to yawn. A lamplighter lifts his pole, checks the hook, and the street inhales a pale flame as if tasting its own reflection. The hour is between yesterday and tomorrow, a polite interval for people who prefer to wear darkness like a shawl rather than a statement. If you're still awake in a few minutes, and you find yourself enjoying the thrilling pace of set management, you can subscribe. Or not. I'll be here, trimming a wick at the speed of honey cooling on a spoon. The lamplighter begins in a shed that is barely a room and almost a memory. On a hook hangs the coat that every lamplighter's coat resembles, because oil does not reward originality. There is a ledger on the table that says, in beautiful and stubborn handwriting, "Fill the reservoirs to the line, never to the rumor of the wine." The can is weighed in the hand. It is a kind of handshake with last week's weather. Wicks are cut to a courteous length. Too long and the flame smokes like a poet. Too short and the street looks surprised. A box of spare mantles waits in a drawer that has sworn to stick in damp months and to give up easily when inspectors are nearby. On a shelf lives the lighting key, teeth filed to fit the stubborn tulip-shaped gas cocks that insist on individuality, the way cats insist on laps that already contain newspapers. He steps outside and listens to the city as if it were a kettle deciding. The first lamps are trimmed at the corners because corners hoard night. With a gentle jab, he opens the glass, like a librarian waking an atlas. The wick, asleep at an angle, is persuaded to stand. He cuts away a small black lace, yesterday's ambition, and the flame thanks him by being the shape of attention. The globe is wiped with a rag that has its own history of sunrises. The latter is not always needed. The pole with a hook can coax most lamps into manners. He moves on with the unhurried urgency of someone who is valued chiefly for his relationship with time. The city is not lit. It is gradually encouraged. Routes have names, though the names are not official. The long one with 6 stepstones, the bakery wet corner. The shortcut that isn't. The lamplighter carries all of them in a pocket map that has been rained on into truth. He knows which lamp leans like a gossip and which one refuses to be seen by fog. The post on Miller Street has a loose collar. The bracket on St. Bride's is fond of creaking at compliments. These are not important facts in daylight, but at dusk they are the city's little passwords. In some towns, the lamplighter's path is the first municipal service to resemble a public schedule. People step out with soup bowls to see where the flame is, as if time were being ladled. The pole is a conversation. At the end is a hook to pull the chain, a ring to lift the glass, and sometimes a tiny spoon to spoon the flame from sleep. In winter, the pole wears a cap to spare the lamplighter's glove from brass that bites. The lock that opens the gas is shaped like confidence. It expects to be turned clockwise, then up a whisper, then back one breath. The lamplighter counts in his head. 1, 2, stop pretending. Children ask him if the pole is heavy, which is like asking a violinist if the bow is wet. It is not the weight that matters. It is the habit of lifting it in the society of roofs. By the third lamp, the city accepts the idea. Windows dim into their own business. Cats begin to audition for alleys. There is a rhythm to the route that is older than the gas itself. A rhythm from the days when men carried ladders for oil lamps. And before that, when someone with a smoldering twist of rope ran between torches like a rumor with legs. The lamplighter inherits all of those paces the way a baker inherits yesterday's yeast. He does not hurry. Hurrying makes flames that argue. He notes things as he goes, not officially. The ledger is for quantities. His mind is for small, unimportant weather. The butcher's window fogs before the apothecary's. The cobbles at Fish Lane like to imitate eels when it rains. The clock near the bridge gains sincerity in November. The barrel woman sells hot chestnuts at a corner that gradually becomes named after her. Then after her daughter, then after retirement, named after the absence of both. The lamplighter observes all of this at ankle height. His version of the city has more thresholds than towers. Inspectors appear once a quarter with scales and frowns. They weigh the can and the conscience. They ask if flames lift 3 inches above humility. They wear hats suspicious of soot. The lamplighter answers as if asked about his children. This one is steady, this one sulks. That one thinks too highly of its own glass. He knows the fines like lullabies, sit on a wens, 2 pennies. Untidy wick, a reprimand shaped like a sermon. Failure to attend to puddled oil, a report in duplicate because the street testified. He signs the paper with a handwriting bred for damp benches and folded pockets, a species of script that will one day be displayed in a museum under the title Infrastructure of Yawn. Half the job is simply moving at the right temperature. Lamplighters swear the city is 1 degree warmer at a height of 7 feet. They call it the mantle's climate. In fog, the lamps form small horseshoes of private weather that pedestrians step into as if trying on an attitude. Sometimes the flame holds its breath when a tram passes. Sometimes it flirts with a moth and tells an unconvincing lie about depth. The lamplighter intervenes only by adjusting the wick, which is the 19th century equivalent of clearing one's throat. When a mantle collapses into a miniature volcano, he gives it the small funeral of his trade, a pinch, a sigh, a fresh collar of linen mesh, and a glance that says, "Behave for the sake of the children." The city learns to time itself by the slow roll of evening. Market stalls count out the last onions, happy to leave one lonely, knobbly specimen to discourage bargaining. A policeman with a mustache like a bookmark studies the new light and adjusts his patrol to match its politeness. Street musicians choose more forgiving keys. The first newspapers of the night edition are lifted from damp piles, carrying news that is already repeating itself like a polite guest. Above, laundry lines become treaties with the wind. Below, rats agree to be rumors rather than headlines. The flame makes everyone honest about scale. By the time he reaches the square, the lamps have made a necklace of shrugging pearls. It is not bright, exactly. This is not electricity. It is a set of patient commas in an argument with the dark. People's faces gain a warmer geography. The bakery's sign writes its flour smell in cursive. The statue of a general looks less certain about all the marching it once inspired. On a bench sits an elderly man who insists the lamps looked taller when he was 30 and shorter when he was 60. The lamplighter agrees because the only useful disagreement at dusk concerns who will mind the cat near the tripe stall. There's humor that belongs to his root. He can predict which house will ask if the lamp outside belongs to them personally, and he will be obliged to explain again that it belongs to the street the way rain does. He knows the boy who waits to see if the lamp will light faster if he holds his breath. He knows the couple who will stand under the lamp as if under a vow, and he will adjust the wick slightly in their direction because romance and good lighting have been on speaking terms since antiquity. He knows the drunk who believes he can blow the flame out with a wish. He cannot, though he often loses his hat trying. A lamplighter's pockets are selective museums. A spare washer, a length of string condemned for past crimes and awaiting a second career. A folded paper triangle that turns into an emergency funnel when a reservoir sulks. A scrap of glass that once tried to be a lens and failed but still reflects rain beautifully. And always wax matches for the stubborn lamp in the cutting that refuses to acknowledge gas as a modern convenience. He keeps a small pencil and writes notes only he can read, because they are written in the dialect of position. No, 28 wind from pastry side. Bridge lamp talks to river, ignore. Night gathers like a committee. The lamps accept their agenda. The lamplighter returns to the shed by a path that is not a line but a confession. I was here, then here where the cobble kicks up, then here where the window with the violin wrapped its song around me. He writes numbers in the ledger that mean the same thing every day, and also not at all, because numbers are reasonable about liquids and indifferent to the geography of footsteps. He eats a late dinner that tastes of brass and leather. Somewhere, a child looks out at the new light and decides to become an inspector. It takes all kinds to keep a street politely visible. The second half of the night belongs to the lamps themselves. He moves through them again, this time with the serenity of a caretaker who knows the residents by their complaints. A mantle that glows too eagerly is given a lesson in moderation by a twist of the key. A lens within his smudge is wiped with a rag that has the honor of being clean for 1 minute in every hour. He listens for the sound of gas becoming polite. It has a noise neither hiss nor hum, more like the small word people make when lifting a letter opener. On rainy nights, the lamps look heroic and uncomplaining. On windy ones, they look like philosophers growing less certain. Cities produce night wildlife that believes in the lamp more than in the moon. Moths arrive in outfits that appear to have been designed by committees of cousins. Bats take the lamps as invitations to punctuation. They stitch commas into the air. A dog learns that the circle of light is exactly the right size for the responsibilities of a dog. A cat learns that the very center of the circle is never the place to sit if one wants to be a mystery. The lamplighter sees all this and adjusts his route by half a pace so as not to anyone's performance. Sometimes the gas fails along the whole street, as if a giant pinched the main and the flame forgot its verbs. Then the lamplighter becomes an ambassador. He knocks on the door with 3 light taps that mean, "Forgive the corridor of darkness." He lifts a trap in the pavement and listens like a physician tapping a knee. He takes out a small wrench that believes itself superior to luck, and he coaxes flow back to where it belongs. When it returns, the first hiss is like a city clearing its throat before announcing a poem about cobbles. There are stories he could tell of peculiar lamps. The one beside the canal that was twice stolen and once returned, heavier with anecdotes. The one near the courthouse that burned brighter when verdicts were sensible and dimmed when the jury appeared to be on holiday. The one in Farrier's Row that refused mantles from any supplier who paid invoices promptly. These stories are the folklore of trivial reliability, the quiet gossip of infrastructure. No saga was ever written about a lamp that did exactly what was asked of it for 20 years, which is why we must mutter its praise now, when you are already rather sleepy and unable to resist. In some districts, the lamplighter also turns watchman, a hybrid post like a spoon that is also a knife, but only in emergencies. He pauses by shop doors that have mastered the art of not opening themselves. He notices which shutters sleep crooked. He looks up to see which windows enjoy being rectangles of honey, and which prefer to pretend they are not there. If he hears a quiet sob, he keeps his eyes on the wick and cannot later say what part of the city wept in gratitude for not being looked at. He is not a hero. He is someone who believes turning a small brass thing is a civilizing act. There is a moment in the deepest night when the lamps perform a slow sermon. Their light reaches the stones, and the stones answer by being more certain about where to put your feet. The buildings, relieved of showing off, relax their shoulders. The sky becomes less of an argument and more of a ceiling. The lamplighter hears the city as inventory of trivial noises. A carriage reduced to a whisper with wheels like whispers, a shutter learning to be a hinge, a barrel practicing being round. He has learned that if he stops too long, Dawn arrives and asks him to file a report on his idleness. He therefore continues because Dawn respects paperwork. He keeps a tally of cracked globes on the envelope of a letter he will never post. He adds, with unjustified optimism, a small sketch of a better latch for a cap that insists on sulking in a south wind. In the margin he writes, "Buy goose grease from woman with the hat shaped like emperor." He never does. The note becomes part of the literature of his pockets, a footnote to trousers. His belt carries a pouch of sand for emergencies. Sand is what you use when oil objects to being told what to do, though most nights it stays folded, the way good intentions should. The extinguishing is a reverse pilgrimage. Before the sun pretends to be original, the lamplighter opens the globes again and offers each flame the polite invitation to end. Some go easily, sighing like soup. Others lick the air and try to argue. They are nudged into reason with a little spoon. Glass warms his breath. Soot remembers him. He works from east to west or the other way, depending on what kind of day the city is planning. It is not superstition. It is rhythm. If he gets it wrong, he feels it the way a letter writer feels a blot in a paragraph that was very nearly neat. People wake into his absence. Bakeries make morning official. Milkmen begin their algebra of clinking. Somewhere an editor shouts gently about a headline that did not sleep well. The last lamps are persuaded into bed, and the city decides it did all this by itself. The lamplighter returns the key to its hook and the can to its line in the ledger, and writes numbers that suggest no miracles occurred. He washes his hands in a basin that believes it is a small square lake, and in its surface he is briefly a man wearing last night. The shed door closes with the patient sound of bureaucracy. He will map later, and the hour the street does not need anyone to explain it. If you ask him what he dreams of, he says gutters that clean themselves and steps that do not surprise ankles. He might dream of a city lit by lightning that lives in wires. Some lamplighters retire just in time to be explained by electricity, which is either progress or a polite end to a profession that told time in flame. He does not take sides. Sides are for daylight. He keeps an old mantle in a drawer, the way sailors keep a bit of rope. It is the correct amount of fragile. There are lamplighters' jokes traded on benches that never look clean but are always loyal. Someone remembers the time the gas flowed backward and frightened a chimney. Someone tells of a lamp that flickered when the opera hit a high note, and everyone agrees art should always register on the infrastructure. A newcomer admits to cutting a wick too bold and turning a side street into theater. He paid the fine with a dignity borrowed from older men, then trimmed every wick in the district to a height that could be called municipal humility. The laughter is slow and specific, like a list of known squeaks. If you measure the city by brightness, you will miss the point. It is measured by intervals, by the distance between one self-possessed pool of light and the next. People navigate by them not because they are perfect, but because they are reliable fragments of intention. In weather that thinks poorly of itself, the lamps are good company. They are minor saints with glass halos. The lamplighter, who would never say something like that aloud, says it to the wick with his hands, and the wick agrees by not stuttering. A final inspection before sleep. The can sits on its exact line. The key is soundless on the hook. The ledger is closed with the gravity of a schoolbook that intends to learn you again tomorrow. He rubs his thumb and forefinger together to check if any oil remains. There's always a little, the way days always borrow a little from tomorrow. He hangs the rag where it can dry into usefulness. He lays the pole in its place, and the pole looks like nothing until late afternoon, when it becomes again the city's slow metronome. If you are drifting now, let the city finish the work. Imagine a street that comes alive in commas. Imagine a gentleman tipping his hat to a piece of glass. Imagine a boy deciding not to throw a stone because the lamplighter praised his dog last Tuesday. Imagine the soft thok of a key, the upward breath of a flame, the faint applause of moths who belong to nobody. Imagine, finally, the spooning of sleep over the last lamp, the polite dark resuming its duties, and the ledger closed, remembering every tiny act of brightness as if it had been the whole plan all along. You might not expect Vikings to have bedtime rules softer than wool, but there it is stitched between the smoke hole and the soup pot. A law of quiet that begins at dusk when the rafters turn the day down like a blanket. If you're somehow still awake a few minutes from now, and you'd enjoy more whisper-level anthropology, you can subscribe. But please don't make a sound about it. The ash stick by the hearth is listening, and it appreciates polite enthusiasm performed entirely in the mind. It starts with embers the color of patient fruit. A woman nudges the fire so it thinks about glowing, not about storytelling. The smoke hole narrows with a wooden plug that acts like an eyelid practicing sleep. Children are slid into wall beds, those cozy shelf caves called bed closets, where blankets are tucked as seriously as trade treaties. A boot is turned solace in toward the wall, not for philosophy, but to dry without clatter. A spoon is set down bowl first so it does not confess its location. The hall inhales. Voices shrink to half sentences, then to nods. Names are saved for morning, which can afford syllables. Night, frugal, counts breaths instead. Longhouses did not own quiet. They rented it from the dark and paid with manners. Near the central hearth sits the steward of hush, a job that sounds like a myth, but is merely an elder with an ash stick and the calm of a winter pond. He does not speak much. He has a vocabulary of hands. 2 fingers together mean enough. A palm held level means sleep. A closed fist means the goats can hear you from the byre. He does not scold. He points to the rafters in which rules are braided like the house's ribs. The ash stick taps the floor, a single dot of punctuation when a story grows adventurous about volume. Newcomers learn these gestures before they learn all the beds, because a nod is the currency that never devalues. The law here is not about fear. It is about respect for the quiet work of night, drying wool, settling beams, allowing dreams to do their administrative duties. A yawn becomes a permissible excuse in any argument, the way snow becomes a reason to cancel all travel, including conversational. Quiet has many practical friends. Cows in the lean to hear everything and are suspicious of comedy after sunset. A shout in the doorway can travel into the byre and convince a milk line to reconsider the morning. Wind reads the thatch like gossip. Too much talk convinces it the house is available for further commentary. The weather is a negotiator you do not want to rile while it is handling your roof. Men with worse intentions also like noise. Noise tells them where spoons sleep and which door contains bread. In a coastal winter, silence is a kind of shield, thinner than iron and sharper, the way ice can be thinner than a thought, and yet strong enough to organize a lake. The steward taps the stick to say, "Let the wolves guess wrong." Practicality grows into ritual, as it often does when people find something useful. After sunset, oaths double. This is not superstition so much as the mathematics of night. A promise that survives the dark is sturdy enough to wear tomorrow. The law encouraged people not to arrange disputes at bedtime. Quarrels spoken after dusk must return colder by morning, wearing sweaters prepared to be brief. Even muck is treated as a sleeper who must not be jostled. People speak of it as if it lies curled in the grain bin, annoyed by clangor. A charm muttered at the lintel does more work if the house is practicing library voice. The gods, who in daylight accept music and meat, appreciate a little unperformed respect at night, in the same way that modern appliances appreciate being switched off properly rather than persuaded with flickers. Communication does not stop. It simply gets more interesting. People speak with taps. 3 taps near the door ask for water. 2 taps with a pause mean bar the plank door, a phrase that, in Longhouse dialect, also means we have decided to be a ship for the night. A hand over the braid of hair by the ear indicates blanket, not story. A finger that draws a small circle on the knee means turn the stew tomorrow. Sound travels strangely in a building where the roof is a giant ear. If a word must be used, it sits in the mouth like a small bird, cupped and released carefully so it does not mistake the rafters for trees. People become good at silent verb tenses and entire grammar of eyebrows. Someone invents the look that means remember thing, and someone else invents the look that means I do, but I also remember the other thing, and the law approves because it produces no echo. The architecture volunteers to help. Longhouses are made of patience attached to timber. The walls listen like good neighbors. At night, the boards hum their own low song, resin tightening, grain remembering rain. A body walking in soft shoes over the plank floor is a sentence that knows where to end. The smoke from the hearth finds its way to the hole without needing to be chaperoned by conversation. Beds built into the walls hold people like polite clams. The door is a heavy plank with social expectations. It insists on being barred early, a habit that keeps it from acquiring stories about midnight visitors. A house that quiets itself early is like a wise person who decides that after sundown, one should only answer letters from tea kettles. Work continues. The spindle turns, but like thought, not like hammering. Wool appreciates seriousness, not applause. A woman with a drop spindle can count out thread with nothing but wrists and breath. A whalebone comb moves through fleece with the calm of a seal deciding on a nap. The night watch counts the half log, not the hour. Logs are what everyone owns in common, unlike bronze bells. When the half log collapses inward and flickers out in a small, dignified bow, someone rises to place the next. It is not timekeeping, it is time agreeing. Shoes wait by the door with toes pointing out, because if they point in, they quarrel with the morning. The horn, polished and persuasive, is reserved for fire or blood, and all other alarms are feet. You can hear a dozen feet find their owners without a word, like chess pieces deciding to be relevant. Children negotiate the new language easily. Adults sometimes forget. The law predicts this and makes space for the fine known as a smile. First offense, the ash stick touches the floor, and the person gives a grin to the room that means, I know. I'll put my volume back on the shelf. Second offense, a bucket of cold water meets the offender at dawn in a ceremony as old as laundry. No one minds much. Everyone has met water in the morning in worse moods. Third offense, a night sleeping by the door where drafts keep counsel. The draft is the elder everyone finally respects. Fines are not punishments so much as reminders shaped like weather. Repairs, the law says, are to be done as thatch is done, quickly, kindly, and firmly. Jokes survive, but the jokes are extremely quiet. A man who pretends to snore like a moose must do it in mime. Guests require gentle training. A visitor may come from a farm where doors squeak for sport and think volume is a compliment. The steward of hush teaches him the local handshake. One finger touches the thumb and then the floor, meaning we speak like this here, where the floor remembers. He is taught to braid his hair loosely so it does not complain when it meets the pillow. He learns that beds are not invitations to tell ancestral genealogies in detail, as fascinating as those may be to daylight listeners with soup. Within a week, he is a convert. He finds himself communicating by raising one eyebrow half a centimeter to say the dog, to which someone raises two eyebrows to say already outside, and he becomes a person who can conduct domestic policy at eyelash level. The animals observe the law easily. Dogs are night scholars. They understand that their job is the space between sound and door. A small foot shift is a paragraph. They sleep near the entrance with one ear open and no commentary. Cats, who invented quiet laws but never wrote them down, merely accept credit. Chickens get special dispensations because they speak the dialect of dawn, and no court has successfully argued them into silence after a certain pale light appears on the roof. Cows, once convinced the buckets will be warmed, hum a note so low it barely rents space in the air. The houseyard under the law becomes an orchestra of almost music. Creak, sigh, ember, straw, hoof, breath, none seeking applause. In the quiet, people hear the kind of things that never arrive at noon. An elder lying awake can hear the thaw traveling through the roof, reed by reed, like a messenger who respects doorways. Someone counting half logs realizes the timbers are not all from the same forest. One rafter describes feared wind, while another speaks inland, and they get along fine. The barley sacks tell you how full they are by the pitch of their posture. The roof occasionally states its opinion of the moon, in a murmur that is part astronomy, part real estate. The world is not mute. It is merely using inside voice. Outside, the settlement behaves as if each longhouse is a sleeping animal. Paths are brushed by boots rather than stamped. A late traveler knocks twice and then a small third time, the way frost knocks at windows when it is almost done with its plan. If a ship comes in late, sails lowered and oars whispering, word moves like a candle, not like a trumpet. Messages written on driftwood are read with care. The night has a strict editor. If danger truly arrives, if flame edits the buyer or men arrive who prefer iron to courtesy, the horn is blown without apology, and the quiet folds itself away like a blanket whose purpose is understood. The law is not a spell. It is a habit strong enough to pass the horn only when the horn is not a joke. There is humor, even in hush. Someone coins the phrase whisper lawyer for the neighbor who remembers every clause, especially the ones that suggest he is owed an extra pillow by precedent. A boy tries to claim that sneezes do not count because they are involuntary poetry. He loses the case but wins a hot drink for creativity. A grandmother insists ducks are immune to all codes of conduct and proves it by pointing at the pond, which provides abundant footnotes. The steward smiles with his eyes and says the law expects ducks to be ducks. The rest of us must try harder because we own spoons. Every settlement has its quiet champion, the person who can close a door so gently it thinks it happened by itself. There's also the friendly offender, the person who loves stories too much and leaks them after curfew. The law accommodates him by creating the after-supper walk, a sanctioned circuit along the edges of the fields where voices may be used to the height of 2 or 3 fingers so that the stars do not feel ignored. This walk is a relief valve. It collects gossip and releases it slowly into the hedges where birds can peck it into smaller portions. People return lighter. The house thanks them by not needing to be stern. Trade follows the law. A visiting peddler learns to rustle his wares like grass. He realizes he can sell more quietly than he ever sold loudly because people can hear their own interests without his assistance. He becomes the kind of man who ties iron pots with linen to spare the ears of the rafters. He receives, as a tip, 3 new hand signs for yes, each with elegant nuance. The law is contagious. He takes it upriver, and by winter, several far-off kitchens are nodding politely at their own shadows. There are finds that only the past remembers. In one hall, a man was made to recite the genealogy of a goat for speaking after quiet was called. In another, a clumsy guest had to barter his shoes for wool slippers lined with humility. There is a recorded instance of someone sentenced to carve a new spoon and then spend a week not clinking it. These punishments are affectionate, the way families are affectionate with discipline. Tomorrow they will laugh about the bucket, and the bucket will be honored for its community service. Underneath all the softness lives a practical hypothesis about sleep and story. A longhouse that whispers keeps its tailies longer. Dreams do not have to shout to be remembered. In the morning, quarrels are sorted by people who have not spent the night sharpening them with syllables. Words feel fresh like salted fish that has been kept properly under a lid. Children are less inclined to appoint themselves horns. Even axes look calmer. The law, in its quiet way, says that words are a resource. Use half tonight, save half for trading tomorrow. Night is not empty. It is full of small agreements. Someone rises to turn the log with a hand that speaks fluent ember. Another person adjusts the smoke hole while listening to the weather's side of the argument. The steward of hush sleeps in the corner nearest the door, not because he is the enforcer, but because he believes mornings are something one should greet from the threshold, like a guest with wet boots. He will open the door at first gray and stand there with the ash stick like a staff that remembers the names of rivers. If the night was well behaved, the morning walks in smiling. A traveler writing in a ship's log notes that this village sleeps like the thoughtful bear. Another writes that he has never heard more details in the dark. The place makes noise into information. He tells of lying awake and hearing the creak of a cart somewhere beyond the byre, a creak that said, "A pin needs turning," without causing any alarm. He brings the story to another coast, and there, people begin to experiment with the luxurious idea that not every conversation requires the entire moon. Occasionally, of course, the code is broken in a way that matters. A pot is kicked. A drunk returns from a feast, convinced the door is a dragon requiring immediate heroic narration. The steward raps the stave. The man's wife wraps his arm. The pot is turned upright, nothing burned, nothing damaged except pride, which can be patched with the thatch tool of apology, quickly, kindly, firmly. The drunk is assigned the morning water run, a task that consults all useful elements: cold, weight, distance, reflection. He becomes a reformed citizen in exactly 2 buckets. There is a paradox at the core that everyone understands without writing it down. Silence is not an absence, it is a tool. It sharpens listening and mercy. In that quiet, someone is crying, and the house hears it without making it a performance. In that quiet, someone is making a plan to move the goats earlier in the spring, and the plan arrives whole instead of frayed. In that quiet, the roof decides to stay, which is all any roof ever needed to decide. When the law works, it does not feel like a law. It feels like a habit that belonged to the timbers before people did. When dawn rolls itself like a pale rug across the yard, voices return. Names come out of their little cabinets and stretch. The door bar lifts with a sound halfway to a fiddle. Chickens release comments from the overnight committee. The steward of hush taps the stave, wants to thank the hall for its cooperation. He sets it by the hearth where it leans like a rule taking breakfast. People pour the first words carefully, as if the cup might overflow. Someone coughs an apology to the rafters because of the joke he told the dog. The dog forgives him immediately in fluent wag, which is permissive in the mornings. If this seems too gentle for people famous for ships and axes, it is only because loudness writes the biographies. Quiet writes the recipes, the strategies, the maps with the safe places marked. Quiet notices the goat that limps before the limp becomes a problem. Quiet hears the ice deciding which direction to reform. Quiet keeps O's honest and luck asleep. The Longhouse is not a barracks. It is a throat clearing itself for tomorrow. If you are drifting, you may keep the rules with you for free. After dusk, say less than you know. Nod twice to say everything that needs saying. Count the half log, not the hour. Let your shoes point out toward whatever door you trust. Reserve the horn for what deserves sound. If you break the rule, smile at the floor and promise the bucket will find you at dawn. The night is a neighbor. Treat it like someone who has lent you a roof. Try not to wake luck, which is sleeping in the grain. Try not to startle the cows. They are storing milk as carefully as you store a story. And if anyone asks, tell them you learned a Viking law that fits in a palm and speaks entirely in calm. The ash stick touches the floor once, and everything understands. You might not expect a 12th century monastery to have a preferred bucket for soaking socks, but it did, and it had a chart about it tacked to a beam with all the energy of a timid thunderclap. If you're still awake by the time I reach the rules about ringing angles, feel free to subscribe for more bedtime bureaucracy, or don't, the water will settle either way. The day's last bell has exhaled. Cloisters collect the footsteps and file them neatly along the stone. Laundry begins when the talk of the day is put away, because linen likes quiet and monks trust the night to count. An oblate boy carries in the baskets as if they were opinions, carefully, edge first. Tunics go in first, then towels, then the unexpectedly political category called domestic cloths, which is a gentle phrase for everything that must be clean without ever being discussed. The laundress, yes, some houses hired one. In others, the lay brothers drew lots and prayed for clear weather and specs hems the way scribes inspect margins. Looking for the little nick that means mine, cloth in this world has a syntax. One knot at the corner signals Brother Martin, who fears losing sleeves to enthusiastic novices. 2 blue stitches signal the prior, whose garments are extremely average on purpose. Soapwort is crushed in a wooden mortar that smells faintly like last spring. The soap tub is called the big trough in Latin no one pronounces aloud. Counting begins. 8 turns of the pestle, 4 measures of warmed water, 1 psalm hummed under the breath, not sung, because singing belongs to daylight. Someone lights a rush beside the door as a reminder that suds time is not sermon time. Even the moths hover like footnotes. Sorting is not simply separating colors, it is a memory palace with handles. Wool which silks when scalded is kept away from zeal. Linen made from flax that remembers being a plant accepts hot water so long as you greet it first. There is a basket for garments with vows, habits, and scapulars, and a basket for cloth with stories, kitchen towels that met accidents, altar linens that met wax. The rules say altar cloths must be treated like polite guests, invited first, think last, not folded while they are cross about it. There is a sleeve with an ink blot that will never come out because the scribe and the recipe argued, and the blot won immortality. There is a towel that smells like trout, a clue that the fish pond produced both dinner and narrative. A small chalk slate lists the order of operations the way a careful cook lists herbs. Soak, tread, rinse, press, dry, mend, bless, store. The verbs are patient. A novice tries to help by wringing a cuff in enthusiastic spirals, and is relieved of his enthusiasm and given the honorable job of counting drips instead. The laundry mistress, if the house has one, uses an authority made entirely of clean hands. She can look at a pile and tell you whose day involved butter, whose involved book glue, whose involved a candle with a sense of adventure. It is said, in a tone that implies a wink without performing it, that the most accurate calendar in the monastery is the washing line, which displays the week in a language of dampness. Water arrives with a small ceremony that knows exactly how important it is. From the mill race it comes, shivering in wooden pails bound with iron that has opinions. If the miller is in a generous mood, he allows the sluice to bless the trough directly so that the water does not have time to think of other commitments. The temperature is tested with a finger and a tiny, not unlike the noise people make when gossip fits properly. Soap arrives in 2 forms. a slippery plant that bruises green, and the more assertive ash-like concoction that wears the smile of someone who has met Greece and intends to win. The lie is stored in a jar marked with a cross and a joke about humility. Monks are not supposed to make jokes about humility, which is, of course, what makes them gentle and irresistible at bedtime. Wooden paddles stand like oars, waiting for a dry river. The trough receives the first basket and lets the cloth unfurl with the dignity of a seal entering water. There is treading, not stomping, but the slow footwork of people who practice plainchant. Two brothers take turns, bouncing on a board across the trough, holding onto a rope so that the soap hears the rhythm. Somewhere a bell counts quarter hours with the restrained optimism of a kettle. The soapwort produces a modest froth, like the thoughts of someone content. The lie, when invited, produces bubbles that look like they would enjoy a debate. A recipe on a wax tablet says, "Stir until the water resembles watered milk," and everyone nods as if they have definite memories of watered milk. The abbey owns exactly one marvelous tool, and it is not a relic. It is a screw press, a wooden creature with a threaded spine that lowers a plate onto wet cloth and insists on being practical. The press avoids arguments about ringing, a method that has produced more household treaties than anything else besides bread. The rulebook suggests pressing by degrees, one turn of the handle per 2 lines of a psalm, and this has the lovely side effect of combining devotion with calibration. A lay brother with shoulders like furniture turns the beam with the slow precision of a star. Water sighs politely from the edges and finds the floor's little channels, which carry it away as if escorting a guest. Before pressing, each piece is rolled around a dowel with straw between layers, a clever invention that stops folds from sulking into creases. In some houses, there is also a mangle, 2 heavy rollers willing to be bossy. In others, there is only the stone someone calls the persuader. Either way, pressure is a sacrament the cloth understands. Rinsing happens in the cold channel, where water has no time for opinions. The cloth meets clarity and remembers its first life as fiber rustling under wind. There is a technique called the monk's fold, a way of holding 2 corners with a twist that lets the water run without letting the garment plot escape. A novice once tried to teach the fish to help by nibbling soap scum, and the fish who are apolitical did what fish do, which is pretend not to have heard. Rinsed linen is lifted up and allowed to think about gravity. The rule is simple: never fight gravity after dark. It wins anyway and sulks less if you appear to agree early. Drying is the kingdom of lines and pegs, an air that knows what it is for. The yard behind the calefactory boasts poles as tall as sermons with crossbars like polite antlers. Ropes stretch between them as if the sky were helping hang the weak. Lines are kept scrupulously separate. Altar linen in the row nearest the wall where the cook, as enthusiasm, cannot find it working cloth on the outer lines where the breeze negotiates a fair treaty between moisture and tomorrow. Pegs live in a bag that once held barley and has stout opinions about tidiness. Each peg is made from a different wood because the carver liked experiments. You can tell which trees grew where by how each peg opens its little mouth. There is always a conversation about the best knot for lines, and it leads nowhere on purpose because the real answer is whichever knot remembers the wind. In winter, when the air is cold enough to teach manners, cloth freezes into gentle sculptures. Monks smile at the invention of linen that stands by itself like a well-behaved ghost. In summer, the sun does almost all the work and is happy to accept compliments. If rain arrives mid-plan, a code is invoked, 3 quick clappers from the refectory door, and everyone becomes weather. The line is walked with the confidence of people who have folded vows. Cloth comes in, not apologetic, just less ambitious. The heated room called the drying loft receives the latecomers and breathes them into tomorrow. Mending is the monastery's way of telling time where to sit. Needles come out in a small parade, most of them made from bone that once belonged to practical animals. Thread is spun from leftover flax that refuse to be idle. Patches are cut from the garment that has retired into service, a dignified afterlife for cuffs that have described too many tables. Stitches are small, counted like beads. Each monastery has a favorite stitch named after a story. The ladder, the fishbone, the gate. Someone always claims that the ladder is faster, but the gate is sturdier, and the fishbone is better behaved in the wash. They are all correct, one at a time, according to weather and pride. A notebook, if the house is well supplied, lists successful repairs with dates, as if garments had birthdays. In its margins, a drawing of a very annoyed sock, the Latin for "do not do that again," and a reminder that patches show care, not failure. There is, occasionally, a rogue tailor who sneaks an extra tiny cross within a seam, a secret prayer no one will find unless they take the garment entirely apart, at which point the prayer will have done its job. Storage is almost a philosophical question. Clean cloth is rolled, not folded, because rolls fade evenly, and fairness is a virtue even for sleeves. Shelves are lined with sprigs of herbs that have opinions about moths. Rosemary if you want the cupboard to remember summer. Mint if it should remember rivers. Lavender if the abbess visits often and compliments are considered strategic. Labels are written on tags of birch bark with ink that refuses to travel. The bark curls a little as it dries and looks like the shelf is studded with polite tongues. There is a chart for loaning towels to visitors, with lines for the saint's day and the weather, and whether the visitor returned the towel feeling wiser. Most towels do. Penalties exist because laundry is the sternest of the gentle disciplines. A garment put away damp must be worn to the garden for a day, which teaches everyone about evaporation in a deeply personal way. The brother who leaves a peg on the line through a storm replaces 10 pegs and recites a penitential psalm that can be recited while carving. The sister who forgets to sort wool from zeal is given the honorable chore of combing felt with patience until the felt remembers being friendly. No one is unkind about any of this. The penalties work like the little channels in the laundry floor, redirecting floods into useful paths. The social life of laundry is more amusing than it has any right to be. The best gossip of the year is a rumor about a traveling cloth merchant who claims to have invented a color that went to fade if you stare at it kindly. This rumor lasts 3 weeks and is replaced by one about soap made from olive oil, which may or may not be a plant and may or may not be allowed in Lent. In one abbey, a poet tries to write a rhyme for soapwort and ends up inventing a vegetable. In another, a scholar keeps a careful list of who drops pegs and hypothesizes a link between peg frequency and contemplation. His chart is gently confiscated for excessive curiosity about things that do not matter. He is assigned to cut new pegs and learns that wood has far more opinions than people. The quiet humor of stains deserves its own small chapter in the air. There is a cinnamon crescent on a sleeve that confesses the kitchen tried a new spice on a Tuesday. There is a constellation of candle wax on an altar cloth that looks suspiciously like a map of the pilgrims, road and causes a novice to suspect God of cartographic whimsy. Ink, of course, repeats itself like a litany. The recipe says ox gall for ink, stale bread for wine, cold water for everything else except beeswax, for which instruction is use patience. Patience is the only solvent the order buys in bulk. Across seasons, the routine stays sleepy and good. In spring, wind takes its work seriously and flattens linen into geography. The yard looks like an atlas where the countries have manners. In summer, the noon rest includes an inspection of lines for the sport of it, as if anyone expects the pegs to have misbehaved while no one was looking. In autumn, drying rooms smell like apples and faith. In winter, the schedule knots itself around light. Laundry becomes a study in how much one can ask of a single afternoon. The press creaks like an elder telling the story everyone likes. The time the river tried to assist and brought a fish into the rinse channel that decided to stay for vespers. The fish episode is disputed and beloved. Every monastery has a fish story. No monastery has a fish witness. Visitors are always surprised at the tenderness invested in cloth. But robes, towels, and linens are the daily rehearsal of vows. Clean enough to meet tomorrow, sturdy enough to survive today, ordinary enough to be ignored when they have done their work. The rulebook says, in words that look like someone copied them twice to be sure, that God is present in folded things. This turns out to be aspirational, but it works. People fold as if they were putting away weather. A novice who once tossed a clean napkin onto a shelf is now a person who performs a small choreography with corners, the way a bird performs with air. Some nights, as the laundry room grows thoughtful and the last rolls are labeled with their quiet intentions, the press stands there like a patient giant in the trough. Dreams of rivers, and you can hear, if you stand in the doorway long enough, the garment you will wear tomorrow, learning how to be comfortable. It is a gentle sound, like someone untying a knot with their mind. Bells test the hour. The lines outside move a little in a wind too small to be named. Somewhere in the scriptorium, a marginal rabbit hops over a drawn fence and decides not to snicker at domestic matters. The world, which normally insists on being loud, allows fabric to own the night for a few soft minutes. If you're still here, floating a little, you may take these rules with you as a travel-sized catechism of clean. Sort with kindness. Wool is dramatic. Soak long enough to forget several opinions. Rinse in water that has somewhere to go next. Press like a person who respects gravity but is not intimidated. Dry in lines that admit the wind as a colleague. Mend as if time will notice and approve. Store with sprigs that remind darkness it is welcome but not sovereign. Forgive stains that tell honest stories. They are just footnotes with color. And when you lay down tonight, consider that monasteries once budgeted stars and hours so that sleeves could dry without argument, and that the humbler a routine is, the more likely it is to last longer than noise. Let your thoughts hang like calm towels along a line that does not need to be checked often. Let them dry. Let them be folded. Let them be put away, one by one, into the great cupboard that is tomorrow, labeled in a hand you recognize, and scented faintly with the herbs that say you did enough. You might not expect a house made of timber turf and very determined sheep wool to have a bedtime policy as strict as a library, but the Longhouse did, and it enforced it with Ember's eyebrows and an ash stick that never struck anything except the floor for punctuation. If you were still awake by the time I described the approved way to cough without embarrassing the hearth fire, feel free to subscribe, or just let the thought drift quietly past like smoke slipping under the roof ridge. Evening in the north is a slow zipper. Light closes one careful tooth at a time, and each tooth has a sound, and the sound tells the house what to do next. Boots enter heel first so the studs don't chatter. Children are slid into wall beds as if the family were filing important documents. Voices shrink on purpose, like wool in hot water, which is ironically a morning problem for someone else. The smoke hole narrows with a wooden shutter until it becomes an eye that prefers to listen. Everyone in a longhouse learns how to speak to the fire without waking it. The trick is to move thoughts as if they were cups of milk, heavy, level, with an understanding that the floor will remember if you spill. An elder, often someone who knows exactly how old a beam is by smell, takes up the ash stick and watches the evening like a shepherd watches a thought. Nothing dramatic, only the soft audit of noises that belong and noises that don't. The rules are wise in the way moss is wise. They spread by being pleasant. A yawn is an apology that everyone accepts. Laughter is permitted if it arrives folded. The door is pinned from the inside so the wind can knock and go away satisfied. Even names are safe for morning. You can call a child by their blanket color and they will come, which is admittedly also true of dogs. The steward of hush, sometimes the grandmother, sometimes a widower with perfect hearing. Sometimes a neighbor who has opinions about roofs acts like an usher at a quiet play where everyone already knows their lines. He raises two fingers to mean enough, and the entire settlement understands that enough is a generous measurement. He shows a wide palm to mean sleep, and if you are not sleepy, you at least agree to behave as if sleep is in the room, inspecting its property. Newcomers require orientation, where to step on the packed earth so it does not relocate itself, how to pass the baby without permitting the baby to pass comment, how to shake a cloak outside in a way that makes the night proud but not noisy. The ash stick is never a weapon, only a sentence marker. It taps thrice for water, once for door, and twice for the international gesture that means your goat is chewing something ancestral. These taps are inherited the way a good spoon is inherited, with gratitude and a promise to keep it clean. Quiet begins at ember glow because the light tells the cows to ruminate, and the cows tell the people to consider doing the same. In a Longhouse, the moon does not set the bedtime, the milk does. There is an approved lore for damp socks arranged by the hearthstone. They lean in a formation known as the fjord, narrow at the middle so heat moves like a boat. There is also the celebrated trick for creaky boards. Place a sleeping dog there on purpose and declare the creak solved by friendship. Everyone agrees not to move the dog. It matters, this hush, in ways that belong to weather, to herds, and to the kinds of men who come out of darkness because they dislike being introduced properly. Noise travels through winter like gossip through a very small town. If you say one careless word, the wind offers to carry the rest of your sentence to the next farm with editorial improvements. Wolves do not read, but they are fluent in pantry percussion. The roof thatch whispers the forecast far more accurately than anyone who guesses. A little sibilance means snow deciding, a steady shush means snow committed, a hurried shuffle means rain with opinions. Quiet allows people to hear the thatch and argue with it constructively. Cows, which are constitutionally dramatic about unfamiliar clatter, calm when the house remembers to breathe in a low register. Milk in the morning carries a memory of lateness. Noisy evenings curdle plans. The sheep that bed down in the outer bay listen for footsteps because they believe. With some evidence that shoes predict stories, the hush reassures them the story is the same every night. We live here, we are boring, please participate. Safety is not a lock. It is the amount of silence you can carry without dropping. By the firelight, every tool is put away so it does not express an opinion in the dark. Axes acquire a dignity when faced toward the wall. The loom is tilted so its head'll stop trying to ring like a very thin bell. The grain chest is closed gently to tell the neighborhood that we respect bread more than conversation. Even the sea, when it can be heard, sounds farther away once the house has lowered its voice. Law visits after the cows have agreed to be quiet. Oaths spoken at night are considered awkwardly powerful because they can hear themselves. In some places, an oath after sunset counts double and is rarely forgiven by morning unless you bring porridge as an apology. Luck is sleepy. It dislikes being startled, and most households prefer not to shake its bed. The steward knows 100 tiny statutes nobody wrote down because they're stored in the rafters where owls keep a copy. If you must argue, you do it with your eyebrows and an economy of adjectives. A promise whispered after dark is like a nail hammered too far, difficult to remove without telling the board. The hush is therefore a civic measure as much as a domestic one. It is also a superstition with good manners. Spirits, if they exist, are described as people who attend to etiquette. They may pass through if everything is in its place and the fire has been complimented. They are said to dislike whistling because it reminds them of drafts. Whether or not spirits care, the neighbors do. A shout at midnight travels down the valley and multiplies until it has more relatives than when it left. A settlement that keeps its own quiet is allowed to keep its own secrets, which are mostly about butter. The Longhouse teaches a particular dialect of silence that still involves messages, as useful as a harbor without need of boats. Signals are physical and charming. 3 taps of the ash stick near the door mean water, not because the house is thirsty, but because someone bluff and practical believes that people are. 2 taps on the bench mean bring the plank door bar, which is called barring the plank, even though everyone knows it is already a plank and does not need a second career as a noun. A hand over the braided hair means blanket, not story, because stories have a permit only until the stew pot is empty. There is also a system of breath not speech breath. 1 slow exhale near the dog means stay. A very soft snort means move your tail from the stew path, and 2 quick syllables through the nose mean good. Children learn early that the air can carry meanings without giving opinions to the rafters. If an actual word must be said, it is said once and then given a place to sit, which is either the floor next to the fire or the ear of the intended person, not the middle of the house where echoes try on outfits. Night work continues, of course. Quiet does not mean idle. The spindle purrs like a well-fed cat, not like a loom with ambitions. Whalebone combs, more common than you might expect, and less glamorous than you might like, move through wool with a sound that invents its own lullaby. The watch turns on the half log, not the hour, because logs and hours are both made of time, but only one is physically present and therefore negotiable. Shoes wait by the door with their toes pointing outward, as if prepared to run an errand on their own. A horn hangs on its peg to explain that it is for fire or blood only. Any other alarm uses feet. The steward checks the straw near the hearth, flips a square to its cool side, then leaves it alone before it gets chatty. A boy practices tying knots you can untie in darkness with cold fingers while pretending to fight dragons made entirely of draft. A girl counts the breaths of the house and tries to determine if the roof is asleep. Someone mends a net with the confidence of a person who knows the sea will hear about it. Another person carves a spoon while promising the spoon it will be used for soup, not arguments. The quiet collects all of this and folds it like laundry. Breaking the hush is allowed, just not for free. The first offense is usually amusing. A visiting trader laughs too loudly at his own cleverness. The steward smiles and lets the ash stick kiss the floor in a way that suggests the floor is considering a new friend. The second offense earns you the cold water bucket at dawn, taken from the spring that believes in honesty. There is a tradition of jokes designed precisely for this. You are allowed to make one during your cold water penance if the joke is funny and short, and if the water laughs, you are forgiven. The third offense invites the least desirable sleeping spot near the draft, which is the house's secular version of humility. Repair follows misstep the way mending follows a splinter. The thatch is padded where the wind found a syllable and moved it. The shutter gets a twist of cord the exact color of don't. The floor receives a little layer of sweet-smelling straw to apologize for the evening's enthusiasm. In this way, silence is not just enforced. It is repaired, which is somehow more affectionate. The best part of the hush, of course, is how it keeps stories safe without insisting on them. Dreams dislike crowds. Quiet makes room for messages that arrive with their shoes off. A hunter hears in his sleep the polite suggestion to check the snare he forgot behind the birch with the idea of face on it. A new mother hears nothing and calls it a miracle. A girl remembers with the precision of a lampwick where the lost needle hides, and in the morning pretends she found it by being wise. The Longhouse claims, without ceremony, that night is a medium and silence is the ink. You do not need to believe this. You only need to notice that people who whisper at bedtime are kinder at breakfast. Somewhere in the corner, luck curls up and agrees to remain. The law notes in a gracious tone that oaths made under the quilt of quiet tend to keep themselves because breaking them would wake the dog. If you could stand outside in the snow and listen to 10 longhouses at once, you would hear what the valley considers decent. Nothing heroic. The occasional rattle where a shield remembers a younger life. The brief squeal of a mouse conducting its cheese inventory. The wind practicing vowels. The river making its old case for why everyone should live a little closer to it. Promise to be careful and let water handle the soundscape. Each house answers the river with a single noise, the small exhale of coals settling. It is an answer older than the alphabet and much easier to pronounce. Sometimes the quiet breaks for good reason. A midwife's low command outvotes the ash stick. The horn takes one breath and the house changes shape, everyone moving like remembered choreography. Door bar up, ember shielded, child lifted, spears thinking about their lives. But even then, the silence under the noise remains like a floor under a spell. You can feel it when the crisis ends and the house slides back onto its rails, as if someone had picked up the building and put it exactly where it expects to be. Repairs follow, and not just to doors and tempers. There's a little ceremony of apologizing to the cows for surprise, accomplished with extra hay and a compliment. There is a reform of the peg that holds the horn so it never leaps uninvited again. A new joke is added to the cold water collection, ready for the next person who believes a story cannot be told tomorrow. The longer you live with the hush, the more multilingual it becomes. You can tell the difference between the silence of snow and the silence of frost. The one pads, the other pinches. You can distinguish the silence of an empty stomach marrow, whistling from the silence of a satisfied one-round beige like good bread. You learn the courteous quiet of someone about to suggest moving the bed away from the draft, and the ceremonial quiet of someone admitting they were right last week and are not here to be celebrated for it. There is the veteran silence of a limb resting on feast day, the shy silence of a child figuring out that sleep is a friend, and the expert silence of a grandmother deciding which memory belongs to which grandchild. These do not require vocabulary. They require listening as if the roof were reading. A traveler once said that the Longhouse whisper law made the people strange, as if they all shared a secret they refused to insult by speaking. Perhaps the quiet tuned them the way frost tunes wood, so that in the morning the world makes a sweeter noise when touched. In spring the hush is perfumed with damp earth and hope, and rules are relaxed for the birth of lambs. In summer the hush is lazy, not strict. Voices float like midges that do not bite. In autumn it smells like smoke and apples trying to become history. In winter it becomes a profession, and the steward with the ash stick is elected by unanimous relief. Through it all, the law remains generous. You are allowed to sneeze, but you must warn the room with 2 fingers raised so that every heart can prepare not to leap. And if you're still awake, you can borrow the Longhouse's bedtime method tonight. Dim the smoke hole of your mind until it becomes a patient eye. Put your boots away with the toes pointing out so your thoughts can leave quietly if they insist. Place the arguments of the day against the wall with their sharp ends polite. Give yourself the ash stick and tap once for water, twice for door, 3 times for it can wait. Imagine the cows settling and the thatch reading the weather for you so you don't have to. Let your breath speak the little words. Stay, move, good. If a shout arrives from some neighboring worry, let your feet carry the alarm while your heart holds the hush underneath. Promise nothing after sunset that you wouldn't promise under bread. When your mind finally pads into its wall bed and turns its solace into dry, watch the last ember in the hearth and learn its trick. It glows by doing almost nothing, and by morning, somehow there is enough heat to begin again without raising its voice. You might not think a small wooden stamp pressed into a pat of butter could run a tiny economy, settle small quarrels, and make cows feel appreciated, but here we are, standing at a market table where everything glistens faintly and announces itself with a picture instead of a speech. If you were still awake by the time I reach the rule about how cold a stamp must be to avoid smudging the dairy evidence, you're welcome to subscribe, or simply let that intention set like cream and never be churned. Either way, we proceed at the safe speed of a cooling cellar. The day for butter begins the night before, when someone remembers not to talk near the cream. Words supposedly curdle milk, which is not chemically accurate, but you can imagine the milk listening and choosing drama. The churn stands in a corner where floorboards are supportive and not sarcastic. The paddle is checked for splinters because nobody enjoys historical fiber in their breakfast. Salt is set out in a wooden box with the lid left slightly ajar so the future can breathe. The stamp, the butter seal, waits on a shelf as an emblem of household identity. A sun with too many rays, a bird that resembles a potato, a lopsided star that, in the family story, is actually a ship if you squint kindly. In the morning, the world is measured by the temperature of hands. Cold hands are respected as diplomatic instruments. Warm hands are praised for kneading bread, but asked to keep a distance from the treaty-making butter. The churn begins with the solemn tempo of a hymn and ends with the agreeable floppiness of success. Butter is gathered, washed until it remembers its manners, and pressed gently into something that holds a shape wooden molds with opinionated corners, or a mound that seems to have ideas about hills. The seal comes forward like a notary with a sense of fun. It is dipped in cold water so it will not make friends with the fat, then shaken once to remind it of winter. The stamp's face is carved by an ancestor with a knife that had other jobs. The lines are practical rather than artistic, like a signature learned from a neighbor. Each household maintains its emblem, the way one waters geraniums, with quiet pride and just enough supervision. Children are permitted to design practice seals in mud. Only some of them are accepted by the committee, which is the grandmother's eyebrows. A good impression on butter is a balance of firmness and mercy, like laws passed when lunch is very near. Too hard, and the pat splits its small geography. Too soft, and the image looks like someone remembered it instead of seeing it. When a day's butter carries the seal cleanly from edge to center, people attribute it to cows' good moods, cool weather, and 0 unnecessary adjectives spoken in the dairy. The stamped pats rest on leaves cabbage if you are practical, vine if you're poetic, so they can be carried to the market without having a conversation with the basket. Somewhere between 9 and 11 a.m., depending on the stamina of gossip in the lane, the family begins the slow parade that butter prefers, shaded, unhurried, with a towel draped like an opinion you'll get to later. At the market, tables create a low skyline of edible hills. Fish make their case with eyes. Bread performs topography. Butter stands very still and hopes to be understood. Here the seal earns its salary. It is, in effect, the entire branding department, quality guarantee, and legal defense. A spiral says, our cows graze near the windmill and they think about philosophy. A crotchet sun says, we salt modestly and keep our cellar honest. A simple circle says, no nonsense, good price. Please don't ask us to tell stories in public. Buyers learn the dialects quickly because butter teaches a visual language that even sleepy people can speak. The seal settles small questions before they get large. Whose pat slid near whose? Which one came from the farm where the churn squeaks in a friendly key? Which pat was returned last week because it tasted faintly like onions, which led to the onion being moved outdoors and spoken to firmly? The stallholder counts by emblems. 3 suns, 4 birds, 1 ship pretending to be a star, she says, and everyone agrees because the stamps are clearer than handwriting. Municipal officers collecting market dues appreciate seals because they transform dairy into tidy arithmetic. A ledger that reads butter, 12 stars at a halfpenny, 2 suns at a penny, 1 unknown with an apology, is the soul of bureaucracy trying to be kind. Trust wears the stamp as a hat. If your seal has been consistent for 3 springs running, people assume your cows enjoy management and your cellar doesn't whisper. If your seal changes without explanation, You will have to offer samples, which is not terrible, but it suggests that something in the story broke. A child carved a new stamp and did not consult the eyebrows. Perhaps, or the old mold was loaned to a cousin who believed returning property was a philosophy, not a habit. In some towns, the parish keeps a catalog of designs and a little book, each drawing annotated in a tiny, confident hand. The landmark, a barley ear, vigorous. Reliable in June, or the Makelson flower, sometimes a flower, sometimes a friendly spider. Good salt, keep an eye on midsummer. The book is brought out only when necessary, like the more serious spoons. From time to time, a traveler comes through with butter that bears no seal at all, simply smooth confidence. The locals regard it as a philosophical objection to graphic design, and buy politely but with the sensation of walking on ice. Behind the tables, seals maintain community standards with a soft authority that law envies. The market bell suggests order. The butter seal confirms it. If a pat with a famous spiral slumps suspiciously, the woman with the sun will tilt her head, and the man with the ship star will clear his throat, and somehow a small rescue occurs. The pat is turned face down to rest, or politely returned to the basket to pursue a career as sauce. Complaints are addressed through emblems, so nobody has to accuse anyone's cow by name. The bird from last Tuesday, a customer says, sang of onions. The bird's keeper nods gravely and rewrites the kitchen. Sometimes there is a little scandal. A boy carves a counterfeit ray of the sun and stamps a small pat to see if fame tastes different. It does not, and he receives a public lecture about rays and honesty and the difference between admiration and theft. The penalty is not severe. He must press leaves for all the market women for a week, which teaches him patience and the shapes of cabbage. The town jokes about the solstice incident, and the grandmother's eyebrows retire for the afternoon, satisfied. The seal's power extends beyond trade into the daily theater of kitchens and cellars. When the pat arrives home in someone's basket, the emblem is visible for a moment on the table, and then often sliced away on purpose so the butter can forget it was once public. The piece with the design is saved for company or for the person who churned, which amounts to the same respect, because designs taste exactly like butter but feel like recognition. Children who do not enjoy grammar enjoy butter heraldry. They learn to identify families by edible icons and can sort a plate of pats faster than adults would prefer to race them. Stories accrue. The spiral once saved a supper from being mistaken for soap. The shipstar survived a summer heat wave beneath a damp cloth with notable composure. The bird sang again after the onion moved outdoors. Salt, too, has a character that seals quietly announce. An angular, geometric stamp often suggests a bold pinch. A soft, round stamp implies mildness. Nobody knows why this correlation exists. The same impulse that shapes a line seems to allocate crystals. It is not science, but then again, science has never spent an hour listening to the market bench and learning the moods of benches. By mid-afternoon, the sun, meaning the actual sun, not the stamp personality, has opinions about butter. People improvise shade out of statements, an apron strung between baskets, a hat that pretends to be helpful, a neighbor's shoulder borrowing your shoulder's cool. The remaining pats are nudged inward toward the cellar door, where the air that has been resting all morning offers to work. A seal made with a chilled face resists the desire to blur. Stamps are cooled in the well bucket for a polite moment between impressions, the way singers sip water in a concert you didn't plan to attend. Serious households keep two seals like twins with different temperaments, one slightly deeper for humid days, one lightly etched for winter when butter shatters if you glare at it. Each stamp acquires small stories of service, an ink mark where a niece practiced. Signatures a notch where it met the edge of a table during a debate about whether butter and herring can be friends, and the surface wears. Them the way a town square wears footprints. People notice, people remember. They do not say brand equity because that phrase has not been invented, but they behave as if it matters, which is the real invention. Every so often, the seal fails its duties by being too interesting. A visiting carver passes through with a box of freshly whittled marvels, roses impossible for a tree to have imagined, a horse that leaps while remaining a circle, a human face that looks like someone who would like advice. Markets bloom with curiosity, half the town buys novelty. The result is chaos, the polite kind. Now 3 families sell butter with a rose that behaves like 3 different botanists, and the market official tries to assign adjectives: the thorny rose, the optimistic rose, the rose with shading. Customers stand longer than butter appreciates, comparing petals and wondering whether optimism melts faster than shading. By the following week, most people return to their humble emblems, scuffed and faithful. They remember, with relief, that clarity is a temperature too. If law has anything to say about all this, it speaks in small print nobody bothers to print. In certain places, the Guild of Butterers, that is not the name, but it is the job, asks members to register their marks with the clerk and to promise never to sell a pat wearing another householder's face. The clerk sits in a chair that suspects it was meant for a priest and draws each emblem in the catalog with a pen that is too thin for dairy, but bravely attempts. Fines, when needed, are measured in salt or in patience. Offenders must sometimes sit at a market corner and re-stamp their entire morning because the clerk noticed that the spiral had acquired an extra ray, which suggested either creativity or a cousin. The fine is designed less to punish than to cool the butter in the shade while everyone considers how close a family can be before confusion becomes soup. The rules also make room for disasters. If a storm overturns a cart and the sealed pats tumble together, the women gather in a circle and, using scent, texture, and intuition sharpened by years of butter conversation, redistribute identity until most people agree that the arrangement is approximately just. The remainder becomes communal sauce for a communal fish. Not even law argues with sauce. Of course, the stamp is also conversation with the cow. On calm evenings, the seal is shown to her, not as proof, but as politeness. We used the ship today, someone tells a cow who identifies as a philosopher, because the rain tasted of wind. The cow considers this and does not object. There is a superstition that cows prefer certain designs, some like geometry, others like birds, but this is projection by people who wish cows were critics. Cows are composers. Their opinions are pastoral rather than graphic. Still, the dialogue continues because courtesy is a form of yield. In winter, when butter dreams of being a candle, the seal presses deeper to persuade it of its fate. In spring, when butter believes it could be a flower, the seal agrees and avoids straight lines. A family might even carve a new stamp to honor a generous kawa. Tiny hard circle with a crown of clover retiring it when she retires, like a number in a sports hall that doesn't know what sports are. Objects accrue tenderness quietly until one morning you notice the stamp has its own chair. Spoons play their part because in any discussion of butter, the spoon is the parliament. There's the spoon that lifts the pat from the mold with a gentle argument, the spoon that smooths cracks with a speech on unity, the spoon that reserves the stamped end for display, and the spoon that drinks the rest of your self-control and takes a ceremonial taste. Some homes keep a patterned spoon with a shallow notch that protects the emblem from accidental enthusiasm. Others prefer a knife so dull it might be a philosophy. When guests arrive, the host sets the pat down with the mark facing north or toward the most interesting person, whichever aligns with the house's astrology. The tiny design, now glistening faintly on the table, serves as an introduction, like a handshake accomplished by dairy. Nobody applauds. They simply accept that butter knows its role. When sales go wrong, it is almost always heat, haste, or hubris. Heat is the enemy that teaches patience. Haste is the friend who borrows your tools and returns them with stories. Hubris is carving a design that looks like a cathedral in order to sell more butter in a town that fears heights. Repairs are soothing. A cracked pat is pressed gently back into union and turned face down for a rest. A blurring emblem is grieved and then eaten privately by the mender as a lesson both delicious and instructional. A stamp that sticks is scolded, cooled, and brushed with a whisper of water. Fines are rarely monetary. The community prefers educational sentences like, "You will carry everyone," as stamps to the well and cool them at reasonable intervals. Or, "You will draw each family's design 10 times correctly and bring the drawings to the clerk so he can admire a thing he built." Jokes cushion embarrassment. Someone says the spiral looked seasick. Someone else suggests an emblem of a practical rectangle labeled butter in large letters. Laughter hovers politely and goes home at a sensible hour. If you step back far enough, this small republic of marks teaches a human lesson large enough to butter many slices of time. Clarity helps. Repetition is comfort. Identity is understood best when it is edible. We admire art, but we buy breakfast. The seal is modest about its importance and never pretends to be a painting. It does its job with the quiet satisfaction of a hinge that has stopped squeaking because someone finally listened. In the cellar, rows of pats wait like thoughtful stones, each wearing its small crest, the heraldry of ordinary life. The cool air explains to the butter that tomorrow will arrive. The butter nods in its buttery way and does not melt over this information. People upstairs close the ledger where the sun, bird, and ship star have been counted again. Someone places the stamp back on the shelf and turns it so the face looks at the wall, not because it should be ashamed, but because designs also sleep. And if you're still awake, you could choose a seal for your own evening. Perhaps a small wave for the moment your thoughts recede. Perhaps a gentle star for the exact second the day loses its argument. Dip it in the cool of your room. Press it lightly on the surface of whatever remains of today. Let the imprint stand clear and calm, and say without speaking that this portion is yours, this pattern is familiar, and this quiet will be recognized in the morning by anyone who has learned to read the simple language of patient things. You might not expect that an entire night's piece in a Viking longhouse could rest on the angle of an ember and the politeness of a yawn, but that is more or less the system. It's not a law written on stone. It's a law woven into wool, tucked under benches, and exhaled into rafters the way smoke finds its favorite beams. If you're still awake by the time we get to the rule about turning your shoes around so they don't point questions at sleepers, you can subscribe. Or simply let the thought curl up near the fire and do nothing at all. Doing nothing is very on brand for this episode. Dusk has its own small script. The benches give a wooden sigh that sounds like a friendly door refusing to gossip. Someone pinches the fire smaller, and it answers by glowing more seriously, as if promoted. Children are slid into wall beds, as if they are letters being mailed safely to morning. Boots are turned solas in so the night air can read them without feeling judged, and wet cloaks are hung from pegs, not just to dry, but to become background scenery. Names are folded in half. People become you, or even better, a gentle knock on a bedboard. The smoke hole above narrows like an eyelid, and the long roof becomes one patient animal listening to straw. There is a person whose job is to tend this most delicate flock of hush. He is not exactly a chief, not exactly a monk. He is the steward of hush, a title nobody engraved on a stone because the stone would start telling people. He keeps an ash stick to gesture with instead of using verbs. 2 fingers mean enough. A flat palm means sleep. A half circle traced in the air means be kind to the wind. Newcomers learn faster than they expect because the language of bedtime is the one human beings learn first before they learn to count or to argue. The steward is patient and slightly theatrical. He knows that a nod can be a sentence. I saw the baby, yes. The baby saw me no. We agreed to disagree. Please continue sleeping. When he yawns, it is a polite excuse that makes other yawns feel included. He does not say much, and when he does, it is in a voice shaped like a wool mitten. He knows where the floorboard creaks live and steps around them like neighbors. He has opinions about embers the way sailors have opinions about stars. He can tell when an ember is the right size to warm the silence without waking it. He has, if you must know, a favorite ember shape, the small almond that looks wise. Quiet is not just comfort, it is equipment. The farm is smaller at night, not because walls move, but because sound does. Noise is an invitation sent to wolves and men who like to practice being wolves. Quiet is a locked gate you don't have to walk to. Cows near the house listen like grandmothers. They prefer voices that are the temperature of milk. A calm voice keeps milk humble. A loud voice teaches it to travel. Wind is the messenger who can be bribed with stillness. In a longhouse, you learn that too much talk is a kind of weather you create yourself. People have stories of the night the thatch almost told a secret during a storm, and how the steward asked it not to with a raised eyebrow and an ash stick. Silence in this place is not the absence of sound, but a tool sharper than iron. It separates necessary noises, fire turning small, a goat changing its mind, from the kind of noises that make the night add footnotes. When you hear only what the house approves, you learn the geography of safety by ear. There are also superstitions, which are simply laws that, like costumes, dreams dislike crowds, everyone knows. Words scatter them, hush gathers them. A quarrel after sunset multiplies its pennies by morning. People who cannot resist a nighttime complaint will find it return to them neat. An interest bearing with breakfast, usually by a person kindly offering porridge, and the inconvenient memory of everything said. O's at night count double and are difficult to uncount. Swearing by the fire after dark is like promising on a boat. The world's balance feels different, and the promise becomes nautical. Luck is a sleeper here, and the law recommends not shaking its bed. If you must praise something grand, you do it by touching wood and leaving the sentence unfinished. If you must mention the weather, you use adjectives with soft backs. The law has all these little habits, and none of them are in writing. They are stored in the rafters beside the smoke, and in the spaces between people where rumor would normally park. For full silence is neither possible nor desirable. There is a technique to speaking without speaking. Signals live in the longhouse like spring mice, frequent and not alarming. 3 soft taps near the water bucket means you want water. 2 taps followed by a pause means bar the plank door, and nobody panics, because everybody loves a bar that's already in the house. A hand over the braid, that woven ridge on the roof beam, is the sign for blanket, and someone slides one along like a cloud that has misread a map. If a word must be said, it is said once, and then given a place to sit, usually in a corner where echoes wear slippers. Mouth to ear murmurs ride breath like small boats on a still river. The steward of hush maintains a little lexicon of gestures for visitors, a pinch of air for turn the fire, a slow blink for the dog is leash enough, a thumb laid flat for good night's luck. Do not chase it. Work continues gently. Night has its chores and its politics. The spindle and the whalebone comb move like thoughts, not like hammers. Cloth is not woven so much as reminded. The watch is a person, not a clock. He turns the half-log, not the hour. A longhouse doesn't have seconds. It has embers reducing themselves responsibly. Shoes sit by the door with their toes pointing outward in case they must be understood by a sleepy foot, and because superstitiously it keeps the house's intentions from tripping over themselves. A horn is for fire or blood only. All other alarms are feet. If a fire gets bold, the horn asks for company with a sound that summons water and advice at the same time. Otherwise, feet do the work of messages, carrying news gently from bed to bed, as if each person were a wintering bee, and news a little warmth spooned from hive to hive. There are moments when quiet is broken, not by disaster, but by humans being midly incorrect. The steward has a curriculum for such adventures. First offense earns a smile and the ash stick touching the floor, which is a visual suggestion that the floor would prefer to hear itself. Second offense earns the cold water bucket at dawn, not poured dramatically, just handed to you with the invitation to say nice things about temperature. Third offense sleeps by the door where drafts keep counsel, the ancient therapy of fresh air and the sound of the outside thinking about coming in. Repairs to sound are patched like thatch, quickly, kindly, firmly. Someone who has snored a rebellion gets gently turned onto their other legend. A goat that has stepped into a pot is both rescued and politically rehabilitated. The Longhouse enforces with humor because humor is the stubborn twin of peace. Someone makes a joke about the goat's desire to be soup. The goat, having failed theater, resumes agriculture. Everyone wins a little. We can be specific because bedtime loves details more than daylight does. The fire is reduced in stages, like an argument that has figured out its own ending. The first pinching of coals is done with a small ring of hazel that leaves charming moons on ash. If you look closely, you'll see people prefer to pinch with their non-dominant hand so that the dominant hand can hold the pot steady. The smoke hole is adjusted with a hook staff that has a notch polished by weather and apologies. The steward keeps that staff hung high so children cannot negotiate with it. The wall beds are full of stories disguised as blankets. Each blanket knows who likes to tuck toes under and who prefers to leave them free like small opinions. Pillows are not so much pillows as friendly sacks, but they remember faces just the same. The place where a woman lay her plate across the pillow last night is a small museum of last night as thoughts. Herd animals have their part. Cows settle with a double exhale that does not need translation. Their breath is the house's slowest clock. Sheep reset themselves, counting people until they fall asleep, which is a generous reversal. Chickens put their heads under their own opinions and cease to be problems. Dogs sleep near the door and dream of editing the day into a better chase. Occasionally, a paw announces a revision. Every animal has a noise allowance as part of the treaty. The steward's ash stick is not a threat to animals. It is a conductor's baton. He points to a better rhythm, they take it. If the cat chooses to have a midnight editorial, she receives it quietly from the bench, the way a town receives a speech from someone who pays no taxes but feels strongly. Outside, the weather negotiates its own hush. Snow has an excellent vocabulary for privacy. Rain is more conversational. It taps on the roof like a polite peddler and then remembers no one is buying. Wind sometimes improvises, playing the Longhouse like a flute it found in a field. The steward allows this if the tune is competent. Thunder is pardoned because it is a traveler. Stars offer their old performances. No one claps. Night glances in through the smoke hole and counts the embers like sheep, satisfied to lose track. The law welcomes this kind of visitor. Silence is not a fort. It is a village that knows when to lower the bridge and when to raise it slowly for the pleasure of the mechanism. Inside, law becomes habit and habit becomes luck. Oaths are held in a small jar near the door where people leave bits of snow and troublesome syntax. The jar is metaphorical but heavy. If someone must swear something in the night, they do it inside their blanket, and the blanket keeps it like a bank that becomes less enthusiastic with each deposit. Morning can withdraw it at a fair rate. If you dream beyond your station a gold sword, a favorable storm, you leave the dream on the bench to cool, and by breakfast it is manageable. The steward does not judge. He himself occasionally dreams of a perfectly round ember, a geometric achievement so stable it would be hired by architects. He wakes, notes that roundness is for coins, not coals, and accepts reality with professional calm. Communication, though wordless, has grammar. 3 taps mean water. 2 taps and a sigh mean bar the plank door. Not because danger pounds, but because the night prefers opinions to be symmetrical. A hand flattened on the braid at shoulder height means blanket, and a blanket arrives from the next bed the way a good idea moves through a room, not loudly and with its own warmth. A finger tracing a circle above the fire means turn the log so that the quiet can see the new face of flame. The steward can hold a conversation with 4 gestures and half a smile. Even the embers sign back, arranging themselves into meaning. A small bright stone says keep talking. A low red shelf says listen. Work continues. The spindle's whir never argues. It explains. Wool receives its future in long sentences, all soft consonants. The whalebone comb lifts tangles out of hair like thoughts being made safe for company. A boy carves a peg slower than time and learns that some crafts are simply slow arguments with wood that end in friendship. The watch walks the house by touch, greeting posts and pegs and sleeping people with a hand that knows the inventory. He turns the half log at measured nothings, and in that modest rotation, the night agrees to be a little newer. Now and then someone forgets herself and laughs. The laugh remembers quickly and returns to its room. The steward's ash stick touches the floor. The floor accepts the compliment. If laughter continues, it is a very good joke. The law of fines wakes up kindly. First offense earns nothing but the communal smile, which is a warm blanket for embarrassment. Second offense earns the cold water bucket at dawn, not as a punishment, but as a scientific demonstration of consequences. Observe, says the steward, not speaking. That water believes in mourning. Third offense spends the night by the door, learning from drafts how to keep its edges. Everyone returns to sleep, carrying a small story, which is interest in the bank of quiet. There's mending to do, always. A creaky hinge oiled. A gossiping bench shimmed. A door that thinks it's a drum, reminded that wood has other careers. Even silence needs patching. Someone mutters a prayer, too energetically. The steward lays a palm on the prayer, and the prayer lies down. A child wakes with a nightmare shaped like a goat that knows Latin. The Longhouse translates it back into a goat that knows hay. The ash stick is a writing instrument for the air. It writes now, and everyone reads it. If repairs go badly, the steward has a last resort, a story told in the lowest voice a human can make, about a hero who once slept through a thunderstorm out of respect. By the time the hero stretches, the room is sleeping. There is, inevitably, a folklore finds too, because people enjoy tiny consequences nearly as much as they enjoy cookies. A man who snored like a distant rowboat had to sing a lullaby in the morning to prove he knows the opposite of snoring. He discovered a surprising tenderness for notes that sit down. A woman who dropped a bronze buckle at midnight had to put it away blindfolded at noon, learning in the process where objects live without sight. A boy who tried to train the dog to whisper failed, but gained a wolfish respect for the dog's professionalism. None of this is cruel. It is housework for manners. If you're still with me, perhaps you'd like a license in the techniques. Pick a sound near you and practice shrinking it. Start with the page turn of your own thoughts. Let it become a slower hinge. Imagine the steward's 2 fingers for enough, and give that sign to the idle editorial voice in your head that is currently raiding your blanket. 3 taps to the air for water. Someone will bring you a drink in the morning. Who cares who? A hand on the braid for blanket. The air obliges by being a bit heavier, as if it has accepted employment. A thumb laid flat for luck. You are becoming a citizen of the Longhouse at night, which is what most of us are, historically, at some level deeper than speech. Outside, the dark grows friendly with fences. Snow drifts like thoughtful punctuation. Wolves, if any, read the wind and find it illiterate. They move on. The moon, when it appears, checks every roof with a soft accountant's gaze, noting coals, noting patience, praising the steward silently for a well-curated collection of breaths. The ship in the fjord does what all good ships do at night. It pretends to be a hill. Seabirds, not being members of the household, keep their opinions and are blessedly far away. Morning will come, and with it noise on a leash. The Longhouse will greet names by their full lengths again. The steward will put away the ash stick and take out the louder tools of daylight. A glance that reminds people of chores, a clap that praises wood for being wood. But the law of hush leaves a residue even then. It keeps stories longer. It teaches children that sound has seasons. It keeps quarrels from becoming weather. It makes luck feel slapdash with, which luck enjoys more than it admits. For now, the embers have contracted into tiny planets, and nobody is planning to discover them. Shoes are facing outward, alert but not argumentative. The dog is inventing a smaller bark inside his dream so he can practice being considerate. The steward of hush sits with his ash stick horizontal on his knees, which is also a sentence, one that says, "We are balanced." He will sleep soon, where the door has taught the drafts their manners. A horn hangs like a moon with a job it is not doing. If a sound insists on existing, it takes off its shoes. We bank the coals softly. Rule kept, house whole, silence returned to its shelf. If you want, you can put your own quiet next to it, labeled with a small tag, your name, the date, and the shape of the ember you prefer. The Longhouse approves of collections. And if you've drifted already, the steward is pleased. He takes credit for everything quietly. You might not expect a room made of timber and smoke to have more rules than a royal court, but the Viking Longhouse kept its own quiet constitution, written in embers and practiced in wool. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you can subscribe, or just set that thought down beside your pillow and let it nap. The Longhouse would approve either way. Evening begins with the easy mathematics of light. One flame becomes 3, then 2 again, then finally one very determined coal that believes in itself. Lamps are pinched until their halos fit like rings around the wick. The smoke hole in the roof narrows to the size of an eyelid that is almost finished listening. Children are slid into wall beds by practiced hands that have folded sails in a storm and can certainly fold a blanket. Boots are turned soles in to dry without making new weather on the floorboards. The day's loud vocabulary is politely set aside. Words shrink to nicknames, then to nods, then to the agreeable grammar of breathing. Even the benches sigh like animals settling down. The night takes temporary ownership of the house, pays rent and cool air, and asks for very little, only that everyone be kind to the quiet as if it were the last guest to arrive. There is a person for this, of course, because people love to appoint a human to supervise things that were working fine on their own. He is the steward of hush, not quite a priest, not quite a judge, but excellent at making silence feel welcome. He carries an ash stick for punctuation, not for correction. 2 fingers lifted mean enough. A palm rested gently in the air means sleep. A slow circle over the fire means turn the log so the flames can change the subject. Newcomers learn the gestures before they learn the mattresses. He can read the Longhouse the way a shepherd reads hills, knowing which beam creaks like a boastful uncle and which plank keeps secrets. He seldom speaks, and when he does, his voice sounds knitted. Sometimes he yawns on purpose as a public service to remind people that yawning is not rudeness here, but a form of applause. A nod becomes a sentence with perfect punctuation. A raised eyebrow delivers a thesis on the ethics of clanking a bronze pot after dusk. He has opinions on embers the way sailors have opinions on stars, and he will share those opinions with a polite silence broken only by the audible agreement of the coals. Quiet matters for reasons that have nothing to do with aesthetics. Noise travels, and where it goes, company follows wolves, strangers, and that one cousin who becomes braver after 2 mouthfuls of mead. Silence keeps the farm small enough to defend. Cows can hear a question being formed. They prefer you to think about it overnight. Calm voices keep milk from learning to gallop. Chickens, when addressed softly, remember they're better angels and do not audition for the chorus. Wind reads the thatch very carefully. If you speak too much, it starts taking notes. In this house, silence is not fear. It is a sharper tool than iron, able to cut problems into pieces small enough to ignore. The old people say weather respects those who waste no words on it. Whisper about snow and it will arrive. Talk loudly and it will perform. So they let the wind be the only guest with a loud opinion, and even then, the steward gives it a look that says, "We have neighbors." There is also the nighttime logic of oaths and luck. Topics that are perfectly reasonable in the sun become double-edged after dark. An oath spoken by firelight counts twice and lasts longer, the way stew does when left near the coals. You might think that is good twice the sincerity for the same price, but it is difficult to spend that kind of oath the next morning, especially when someone needs it to be smaller. Luck in a longhouse is treated like an elderly relative who is asleep in the best chair. Everyone moves softly, and no one dares to tidy around it. Quarrels are postponed until dawn, when the tongue is less convinced of its own wisdom. A promise made at midnight is filed under hazardous materials and examined with breakfast. Dreams are encouraged to visit, but they mustn't be startled by chatter. Dreams dislike crowds and will not leave flowers if interrupted by a clank. So the hush is practical as well as poetic, a way of storing good fortune without waking it to ask for identification. Speaking when it must happen dresses down. Inside the longhouse, signals float about like tiny birds that know the roof beams by their first names. 3 soft taps near the water bucket mean, "Water, please." 2 taps followed by a pause mean, "Bar the plank." Door, not because danger is at hand, but because doors appreciate being appreciated. A hand laid across the roof is brayed. The ridge beam's proud spine asks for a blanket without summoning nouns. If words must be used, they travel by the shortest route, mouth to ear, riding breath like a small boat on a very calm fjord. Each message sits down where it is delivered. Echoes, if they happen, wear slippers. The steward of hush keeps a small catalog in his head, the pinch of 2 fingers for turning the log, the tilt of the wrist that means the dog is already on duty, the slow blink for good night's luck. Please do not chase it. Night work continues because the dark only closes certain shops. The spindle spins like a thought that has learned patience. The whalebone calm passes through hair and removes tangles as if they were poorly phrased sentences. Men and women, nets, and history in equal measure. The watch is a person, not a bell. He turns the half log to mark time because the house counts in embers, not minutes. Shoes, cleaned and grateful, sit by the door with toes pointing outward, ready to be inhabited without argument. A horn waits on its peg, important but idle. It has only 2 duties, fire or blood, and neither is fashionable. All other alarms are feet. Soft steps to the steward, a quick trip to the water bucket, a glide to the door to listen to weather making up its mind. The longhouse believes in feet the way cities believe in paperwork. If something is real, it can be walked. Of course, sometimes the hush stumbles. Humans are an optimistic noise. A joke arrives too late and refuses to leave. A bone ladle falls out of the conversation and tries to make a point on the floor. The steward's law is gentle and practical, like a good spoon. First offense earns a smile, the kind that says, "We like you. Please be quieter versions of yourselves." And the ash stick touches the floor to remind even the floor to take the hint. Second offense earns a date with a water bucket at dawn. The bucket is not angry, it teaches. Observation, says the steward with his eyebrows. Water believes in mornings more than you do. Third offense sleeps near the door so drafts can advise directly. Nobody is humiliated. The house keeps its dignity. Silence is patched like thatch, quickly, kindly, firmly. A snorer is rolled onto the side where his dreams are less enthusiastic. A restless goat is reminded that modern critics whisper. A child is walked in a slow orbit until the orbit becomes a circle drawn on the floor of sleep. Repairs extend to wood and thought. Hinges receive oil-measured impatience. The door that likes to drum is praised for rhythm and then given other hobbies. A bench that creaks to tell stories is allowed exactly one sentence and then covered with an extra piece of fleece, as if tucking in a relative who has discovered a second wind. The steward carries a small pouch of salt to sprinkle on the hearthstone, not as spice, but as punctuation. He knows where the smoke prefers to congregate, and he moves it with a kind of authority usually reserved for librarians and weather. If an ember brightens too eagerly, he addresses it by name, which is always friend, and friend remembers its manners. This is not mysticism, just maintenance. Details of the Longhouse's favorite sport. The colds are pinched into shape with bits of hazel that have polished themselves honest. A single coal, the size of a bean with ambitions, is kept in the middle as if it were a small king who knows better than to speak. The smoke hole can be widened or narrowed with a hooked staff, whose end looks like a shepherd's opinion. Blankets remember their owners in the way bread remembers the oven that loved it. Pillow sacks are filled with whatever the season offers soft moss in earlier months, the hair of animals with generous hearts, feathers donated by birds that no longer require them, and each has learned to hold a face without asking questions. Children sleep with one hand outstretched, because even while dreaming they are applying for a future tool. Animals negotiate the treaty at night with admirable professionalism. Cows settle their argument with gravity and produce two long sighs that make the rafters reconsider philosophy. Sheep count themselves, a charming efficiency that saves everyone time. The dog takes his post by the door and edits the day into a better story with his paws. In sleep, he drafts an improved chase, which will be peer-reviewed by morning. Chickens put their heads under their own opinions and stop trying to be archaeologists. A cat performs the ceremonial patrol of places that are already fine, and then sleeps on the warmest thinking anyone has thought all day. The steward thinks each species with a touch of the ash stick against the floor, because even animals like to see their names on the minutes. Outside, the sky practices restraint. The fjord wears the moon like a borrowed coin. Wind arrives with its instrument case, but plays mostly scales, checking the Longhouse for broken notes. Rain, if present, knocks politely and then proceeds to hold the sort of conversation that improves roofs. Snow muffles history for miles and makes a virtue of soft decisions. Stars read the smoke hole as if it were a window with a very slow doorman. The house answers with a low, warm glow that says, "Not now, thank you, but yes to everything you can write down tomorrow." Inside, language continues to be optional. People have whole exchanges with wool. A blanket lifted a fraction says, "I am awake and not proud of it." Two breaths arranged in a certain ratio say, "The baby has resettled." Please do not teach him geography. Hands trade items like conspirators trading weather. Needle, thread, cup, bread, patience. It is astonishing how much can be done with not quite speaking. If you attempt this at home, feel free to copy the gestures. The Longhouse would consider that good diplomacy. Tap gently 3 times near the water glass beside your bed to remind your future self that hydration is a morning idea. Turn your pillow as if it were the half-log of time. Allow your thoughts to step out of their boots and face the wall. This is how historians teach time to pass. There is, inevitably, a folklore of consequences that everybody tells with affectionate exaggeration. The man who laughed like a dropped shield had to sing a lullaby after breakfast, proving he knew both ends of sound. He discovered notes that sit down politely and was never the same again. The woman who stirred a pot too briskly after moonrise had to stir porridge exactly 100 quiet turns the next dawn, which improved both her wrists and her reputation for subtlety. A guest who clinked a drinking horn against a post swore to the horn that he would become boring by sunset. He did, with admirable discipline. The fines are jokes with jobs, and the jobs are housekeeping for the social weather. And then there is the law's last page, which contains nothing but a bedtime hypothesis. It is kept in no box and taught to nobody until they notice it themselves. It says that a longhouse that whispers keeps its stories longer. It says that dreams prefer a corridor with sconces, not torches. It says that morning is the natural time to unravel the knots you tied with the dark as generous rope. You may not find this in any carved rune, but every smooth spot on every bench proves someone believed it with an attentive backside. Quiet makes room for messages that do not like crowds. People wake with solutions that arrived in a sensible suit while they slept. The steward takes no credit. He pretends not to notice when peace does his job for him. If you are awake enough to try a small experiment, place the law in your own room. Imagine the smoke hole above you narrowing to a considerate coin. Let your breath turn into 3 soft taps that say water, and then let the idea of water agree to become tomorrow's task. Turn your pillow half a log. Appoint a steward of Hush You or a nearby stuffed animal with diplomatic experience. Give the cat a night patrol even if you do not own a cat. Face your shoes toward the door so they will know where you intend to go in the morning, and then take away the urgency of getting there. Promise the horn not to summon anything. This is how rooms volunteer to be longhouses. The embers will choose their final shapes: a delicate almond, a small coin, a surprise comma. The steward of Hush, who has been sitting at the hearth with his ash stick across his knees like a horizontal promise, will lift his eyebrows at no one and particular and declare with several micro movements that the shift has gone well. He will sleep by the door, which is where drafts study ethics. The cows will conclude their second sigh. The moon will check her housekeeping list and nod. Somewhere a goat, deep in thought, will pause in its dream of being promoted to furniture. And the house, pleased with its unsolved homework, will continue being excellent at the one thing houses are built to do at night: hold people safely while they do not speak. Morning will gather itself in the corners like new firewood. Names will resume their long form. The horn will still be unemployed, and everyone will consider that a success. Children will pop out of wall beds as if mailed sleep has been delivered and stamped. People will find their boots properly turned, politely dry-pointing the direction the day requests. And the steward will set the ash stick back on its peg, as if shelving a well-read book, sure that tonight the law will assemble again without a single letter having to lift its voice. For now, though, the house is already mostly asleep, and you can be too. If any noise insists on existing, it will take off its shoes. If any thought feels too sharp, it can be sanded by the wool in your blanket. The embers are doing the useful version of nothing. The roof is making a low agreement with the sky. You may set your worry beside the door to be admired by drafts. We will bank the coals softly, rule kept, house whole, silence returned to its shelf, and your night filed under good.